Okay, good afternoon everyone. It's great to see you. My name is Yujin Yaguchi. I'll be moderating this session. I serve as Vice President for Global Education here at this university. It's a wonderful pleasure to have this session, Dialogue at UTokyo, this afternoon. We have a very special guest, Mr.Ben Nelson. I think all of you know who he is. He's the founder of renowned Minerva University and currently CEO of Minerva Project. And he's going to be talking to us, and later on we'll be having a conversation with our President Fujii, or perhaps our Vice President Hayashi will join as well. So without further ado, it's a 60-minute session, so I'm just going to skip the formalities, and I'm going to ask President Fujii to give our short welcoming remark before we ask Mr. Nelson to speak.
Yes, so I will make it shorter. Mr.Ben Nelson is already introduced, but the CEO of the Minerva project, and about some of you may already know about the Minerva University, but it's a really, so he's a kind of really real innovator in the domain of education. So, and in fact, he's here for so he's one of our Global Navigation Board members. And we had a global GMB meeting this week, and then he's here for that event. And in fact, we have a privilege to have him here and then to have a conversation with you and with me. Minerva University and UTokyo is, completely different universities. But I also should say that we will also share a kind of same kind of mission or enthusiasm to educate excellence in the students, and also to be able to foster all this younger generation for the future world. And that requires a kind of innovative also proposals and vision to make a kind of better world. So with that, so we just want to hear from Ben, and also have some Q&A session afterwards. So please, over to you.
All right. I think this works, yes. So I thought I would give you a little bit of a history, a personal history of how I wound up being where I am today. I remember when I was starting college, I was 18 years old. It was a long time ago. It was before the graphical user interface to the internet existed. So it was basically before a commercially viable internet existed. It was just, at the time, the internet was really mostly a research platform for universities to communicate with one another. And so when I was starting college, we didn't know anything. We didn't really have access to information. We didn't really have a sense of what was happening in the world outside of what we heard on the news. And so when I was studying, I studied at the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School of Business, it was an undergraduate business program. I came into the university not knowing what it is that people did after they graduated. I had no sense of what the jobs were. And when I came to the university, I heard broadly that there were two kinds of jobs that were available. One is you would become a consultant, and one is you would become an investment banker. And those were the two options, because that's what people did when they graduated. And that was indeed what 90% of graduates of Wharton wound up doing. They did one of these two career paths back then. And so I set about my undergraduate journey assuming that was going to be my lifelong path. And much like all of professional services, there is a highly defined and structured path. You would get your undergraduate degree, you would then go and work for one of these firms for 2 or 3 years as an analyst. They would then fire you because everybody gets fired from those firms, and you would go and get another degree, a master's degree. And then you'd go back to that firm and you'd become an associate, and you'd work really hard, and you'd become a senior associate, and then a vice president, and then a partner. And then once you get to be a partner, you get to die on the job. And that was effectively the path that everybody would follow. Now, strangely, when I was just starting college, I also, in my first year, happened upon an interesting course. And the course wasn't interesting because the course itself had interest to me, but because it exposed me to an idea that I also had no idea about, never heard of before, which was, why was it that an American university looked so different from universities that predated the American university system in Europe? And it was kind of an eye-opener. Now, why was that important? Because the European university model, like the model of universities to this day, was created when Europe was ruled by monarchs. And there were two power structures that existed in Europe in the Middle Ages when these university systems were established. There was the crown, meaning the monarchy, the king, queen, fiefs, etc. And there was the cross. There was at the time, the Roman Catholic Church, because it was before the Reformation. And that was it. Those were the two hegemonic power structures that ruled society. And therefore, universities were built to serve one of those two interests. Either you were there to serve the crown, and you were a subject of the crown, in modern terms, a slave, or you were you were educated to serve the cross or the church, which means you studied to be a priest and continued to that endeavor for the rest of your life. And both of those systems were meant to be lifelong. Now, in the United States, the founding fathers of the country envisioned a different system, one where religion existed but had no power in society. So people could worship whatever they want, but it wouldn't be a power structure in society. And a government where the sovereign wasn't a monarch, but were the people themselves. It was governed for the people, by the people. And they realized, wait a second, if you aren't going to live your life as a slave, because a portion of America at the time of the founding was free, that portion was not. But as the government was conceived for the free people of that country, they said, well, you need to actually be able to govern. You have to participate in governance. But that may not be what you do, certainly full-time, and certainly not for your entire life, right? You may be a merchant one day, and then maybe a diplomat another day. Or you may be a doctor one day, and then a senator, right? Or you may be a newspaper publisher, and then you'd be a president, right? And that was a radically crazy idea. And the education system that was necessary for that had to look different. Rather than training somebody for a career or a job that they would fulfill for the sake of who they were serving for the rest of their lives, instead, you had to tool the citizen with what Franklin referred to as practical knowledge, what Jefferson later called useful knowledge. And that was a radically different idea. It was generative, which means that it was a set of tools that you could apply no matter what you did, right? So you could switch careers, crazy idea 250 years ago, so that you can make decisions in careers that were not your own. For example, when you voted, right? That was a crazy idea, where you asked people, what is it that we should do as a country, as opposed to telling them, right? So was kind of a radically different approach. And that's why American universities evolved in a different way. But in that process, along the evolution of American universities from colonial times to the Revolutionary War, then much more later into the 20th century, there was a drift away from the original ideals of what was necessary to educate an enfranchised or voting public. And instead, universities started having much more departmental structures, whereas the broad, practical, useful education that was the purview of universities, and certainly in the 19th century, and to some extent in the better part of the 20th century, by the late 20th century, that role receded, and the role of content knowledge or subject knowledge grew much bigger. And so American universities, even though they didn't resemble European universities, wound up having a closer outcome. And what would happen is you would study a field, and then you could do other stuff. But the other stuff became less and less structured. And so it was more for entertainment purposes as opposed to for educational purposes, stuff that people liked. And even when they thought, oh, we should be exposing students, they exposed students in minor ways. And I thought that was a big problem. And in fact, I thought, this is a major problem, because when I was an undergraduate, it was about 25 years since broadly American higher education abandoned this curricular approach, this practical approach to education, what was referred to as creating habits of mind, tools that people could use. And instead went into this more very subject-based dominated era. And I came up with this plan on how universities should actually be educating their students, and I was very passionate about it. I wrote my final paper in my freshman year about this in this course. I went to the provost's office and I gave him a copy and I said, this is what we need to be doing. And I joined what was referred to as the Student Committee on Undergraduate Education. It was the oldest branch of student government at Penn. I became the chair of that organization. I was in all of the committees and pounding my fist on the table and morally, how could we do this? And this is a problem, and nobody cared. Professors weren't there to teach, they were there to research. Students weren't there to learn, they were there to get a degree. The administration couldn't care less about teaching or learning, and I was really the only one that was jumping up and down and people ignored me. And again, not knowing much about the way the world worked, by the time I graduated, the commercial internet existed, so it was a very interesting time in history, and and I went off and said, well, I can only have two pathways in my career, so I became a consultant. Now, I often think, what would have happened if I was born 30 years later? If I was entering university today, and I would have had some different advice. I would have been told, find your passion. And whatever you do, stick to it. Right? Go and, work towards that thing. And so if I would have had the same idea today as an 18-year-old, people would encourage me to say, look, you should just figure out what your goal is, and then work towards that goal methodically. So what would that have meant for me, coming up with this idea? Well, it would have meant that, I would have made these arguments and people would have ignored me, and I said, okay, so I'm gonna go and establish my own university. I'm gonna show you how it should be done. Well, how do you establish your own university? Well, obviously, the first thing you need to do is you have to graduate with your bachelor's degree, and then you have to go get a PhD, right? Because if you don't get a PhD, then why would anybody take you seriously? And then you would go and get a PhD, but it couldn't just be any PhD. It would have to be a really good PhD from a good institution. And then I would have to use that PhD to get a postdoc position, right, where I could do a little bit more research and demonstrate my worth to academia. Then I would get a professorship. I would work 7 years, have to produce excellent research because I would, of course, have to get a professorship at a very prestigious university. Then I would have to get tenure at that university. Then after I would get tenure, I would have to start moving into the administration, probably getting a full professorship first. Then I'd become a dean. Then I'd be very lucky, I'd get a job as a provost. Then I'd become a president. And then maybe if every one of those steps were exactly right and I could become president of a very prestigious university, at that point I could quit and start Minerva. That would be the path. Let me tell you what my path was. But the first job that I had was a summer internship where I was doing software quality assurance for an enterprise a supply chain management software. Then I was in charge of marketing for a hazardous materials transportation industry magazine. Then I was a small business consultant for a year. These were all while I was an undergraduate student, by the way. Then I spent 3 months in Singapore helping the Walt Disney Company envision a traveling Disney that would go and test various markets in Asia, launched in Singapore and Taipei, and then the financial crisis hit in 1998 and it shut down. But that was after I left. Then I became a mergers and acquisitions consultant in telecommunications industry. Then I became the CEO of a company that built local internet portals for small, wealthy communities in the United States. Then I joined an online photography company where I was initially in business development, then I was the CFO, then I was the CEO, and ran it for, was there for 10 and a half years, ran it for 5.5 of those. Then I was the executive chairman of a home improvement company, home improvement app company, that then sold to Home Depot. And then I started the world's greatest university. Now, no college counselor, no career counselor, nobody in their right mind would be able to chart that pathway. But what I actually learned in that journey was vastly more valuable in actually realizing that initial kernel of an idea I had at 18 than if I would have gotten on the train. Right? If I would have just said, oh, okay, that's my goal, there's the path, I'm just going to get on the train and I'm going to ride it on up. And in fact, what I saw as I progressed in my career and I met other people is that pretty much anybody I met who was happy with their life, anybody I met who was pursuing purpose, anybody I had read about in history, anybody who had any impact in the world, none of them got on the train. And the few that were got off of it as soon as possible. Anything that they did that had broad-based impact, there was no charted path for. And by the way, many people were on the train and they, became happy to be dentists and fulfilled and drill teeth for their whole life. And I'm very glad that they did that because I have had a lot of cavities because of all the sugar I ate as a kid, and I need my teeth drilled well. And so that's great. And people were happy with that pathway. But I couldn't really see the connection between fulfillment and having broader impact in the world as opposed to practicing of a profession and a well-trodden path. And so, very long story, but if you look at what the construction of Minerva is today, the university that we built, the way that we work with other universities to help reform what they do, I can go through, which I won't bore you with now, but every aspect of the pathway of creating Minerva, and I will connect it to various experiences I had in my life. And I'll give you this final anecdote. When I was starting Minerva, I had to hire a team. I spent 2 years working on it by myself, and took these initial ideas and workshopped them more and more, and developed the curricular approach and the pedagogical approach and the model around the university and the long-term 50-year plan on how the university will lead to reform other institutions, and then how we're going to reform high schools, and all the things that we worked on. But it was still just me. So I raised a bunch of money, and I had to build a team. And I built a technology team to build the technology, and I worked with somebody to help me with navigating the regulatory system. I found somebody who would work on the branding of the institution and the student experience, but I really needed an academic. I needed a very serious, well-learned academic. And I happened to meet at a conference an extraordinary academic who had appointments at 5 different schools at Harvard, who was then left and ran one of the most important social science centers at Stanford. And I met him at a conference, and we had lunch. And I explained to him what it is that Minerva would be about. And I would explain to him the philosophy behind our pedagogical approach, our curricular approach, the student experience, and what we do. And as I was explaining to him, he was peppering me with question after question. I kept hearing him mutter various names. Oh yeah, Missouri, Willingham, yeah, absolutely. Bloom, yeah, this is great. And then at the end, he looked at me and he said, he was one of the founders of neuropsychology, and he said, "This is remarkable. I have never met somebody who has been able to take the entire body of literature in the science of learning and put it together in such an interesting way. You know, the research depth you have behind this is incredible." And I looked at him and I said, "The science of what?" I didn't even know the field existed, because every aspect of the design, the initial design behind Minerva, had nothing to do with research. I didn't know it was there. It just had to do with my personal experience in this crazy journey. Now it turns out that those intuitions happen to have decades of research backing them. I didn't know that at the time. And when he came on board, he connected all of these ideas to the science of learning and helped hone them and develop them further. But it was, I thought, a fascinating microcosm of, here was a man in his 60s who knew all of the literature, who understood it, but couldn't have conceived of putting it together. Whereas there was somebody else who didn't know it even existed, who wasn't grounded in the way things had to be. And because of that, could envision something different. And so, little example of what a random path can lead to.
Thank you very much.
Let's give him
A round of applause.
Okay, thank you.
So, and just to kick off the conversation, I'll pose the first question to President Fujii. So,
Me.
compared to Mr. Nelson, your path looks like you've been on a fast train all your life. Graduated from University of Tokyo, it's graduate school, PhD, cutting edge research, administration, all the way up to the president. You're doing the right thing as far as Mr. Nelson is concerned. But both of you have vision and innovation. So from that perspective, would you please respond to what
Right,
you just
yeah.
said?
Oh, I'm not so easy, but yeah. In fact, I myself if you have a look at my CV, then it looks like a kind of very much straightforward. But so during that time, these 30 years since I graduated from this university, for example, I started off from the naval architecture department. That is for the engineering science for the shipbuilding. But then I taught in the graduate school, which is in the precision engineering department. And also I did, so as a research work, it's microfluidics. And then that is completely different what I had learned in this naval architecture department. And I have no idea about the biology or even DNA or proteins since until I took a kind of very, basic education from my postdoc. That was at the Riken Institute when I worked for Riken Institute in 4 years, which is like, I was one of the associate professor here at the Institute of Industrial Science, which is Seisan Jujutsu Kenkyusho. Then I took the postdoc position at the Riken Institute, and then spent 1 year as a postdoc, and then became a research scientist. And then I started off a kind of completely new domain of research, which was microfluidics. And then the first thing I did at that time was I hired one postdoc whose background is very heavy biology. And then I asked him to, train me as a kind of biologist. And then every day we went into the cold room and then do all this protein purification and so on. So that like this way, it's a kind of a really a kind of big, change in my personal viewpoint. But apparently it's not really appearing in my CV itself. But. And then also at a certain moment, so I went back to the Institute of Industrial Science, and then so I was invited to join the research center, which is called Underwater Technology Research Center, because I was working on this underwater robotics during my graduate school. So that they are kind of asking me to do this underwater robotics research, but here I didn't do anything about underwater robotics at that time. So that I asked them if I could be able to do my microfluidic research, but I'm very much care for these underwater applications. So then that's why I came up with the kind of new concept of apparatus to be able to chase the kind of underwater or deep sea microbes in this very harsh environment. So that is one of the application domain for the microfluidic research. So like this way, so it's a kind of really the research topics or research domain itself will be really much changing. And at a certain moment, I was when I was so one of the associate professors, but I got plenty of students who's doing research in my group. But then I really much also became care about the research environment for the students, so that I can talk. So I talked very much to my boss at that time, and then at a certain moment they asked me, so you think about it, and then you do think about it, and then at a certain moment I asked them. So they asked me to go to the ministry. And then that is also, in the ministry I worked for 2.5 years, and then I came back as a full professor. So like this, it's a kind of really broad scope of experience that I could have. So it's not a kind of, it's on a train maybe, but kind of a training going very much, around many places.
And when you got on it, you didn't think when you started your PhD, I'm going to be president of this university at some point. That wasn't the goal.
Not the policy.
Thank you. So perhaps would you like to?
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you about the concept of this Minerva education, because we just had a small discussion, but it was also very important for also all the audience to know about. So, but if you could briefly elaborate.
Yeah, happy to. So when you think about what does a practical education mean? A practical education means that you're able to use what it is that you've learned. Right? That sounds pretty simple, sounds kind of obvious, but when you actually step back and think about what the implications of that are, you find, and once you understand a little bit of the science of learning, as I've not only understood over the last decade plus, but have become very deeply expert in, is that using knowledge is unnatural for human beings. Now, that's a very odd statement to say, but in the sense of a practical application across subjects, meaning, remember the idea of you have a profession 1, but then you're asked to move to profession 2, right? Like Teruo just described. Or you have some expertise in one area, and now you're asked to vote and support a candidate that is arguing for a field you know nothing about. So you actually have to apply some practical knowledge in order to be able to decide whether or not this makes a good idea or makes sense or not. And that process psychologists refer to as far transfer. That's the term. And it turns out that transferable learning is almost like the Yeti, the abominable snowman. It's almost a myth, because when much of the science behind transfer has been conducted, it demonstrates that universities do not teach transferable learning or transferable subject matter. That basically students that go through university education, rarely remember what it is that they were supposedly learned, meaning that if you actually give them the same final exam a year after they took the final exam and got an A, they get an F, because they can't actually remember, they didn't actually learn what it was. They were able to demonstrate it in one period of time and then forgot about it. And then, but even at the point of the first final exam, where it's still in their head, if you context switch a little bit, students don't know what to do about it. And that is why when we think of people who know what to do in situations they've never encountered before, we think of them as wise. Right? That's the source of the term wisdom. What is being wise? It's not knowing a lot of stuff. It's being able to use it. It's being able, in our definition, to appropriately apply practical knowledge in novel contexts. In other words, knowing what to do in a situation you've never encountered before. Now, when I say a wise person, who do you think about? Think about somebody who's old, right? They have gray hair, they're grizzled, they've been around a long time, they've made a bunch of mistakes, and then sometimes they figure out, oh yeah, now I see the pattern behind my mistakes, and I know not to repeat it again. But at the same time, most old people we know are not wise. Right? Wisdom is rare even among the experienced. And what's worse, the younger generation doesn't listen. So wisdom doesn't get passed down. If it did, the world would be a lot smarter place than it is now. Now, why is it? It's because when wisdom is attained, it's attained over a long period of time, and it's attained by accident. Right? One wise person versus another doesn't have the same kind of advice. They don't have the same type of experience. They actually learn very different lessons. And most importantly, they don't know why they learned it. They can't explain. because so much of it is based on intuitions that have been built up over time, usually because of trauma. And therefore, it's not analytical. It's not something that they can sit down and say, okay, well, let me explain to you step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and therefore here's the conclusion. Right? They didn't learn it that way, they didn't internalize that way, and they cannot communicate it that way. What they usually will tell you is, don't do that, that's stupid. Kids say, what do you mean it's stupid, old man? What do you know? and that's where the transition happens. So the Minerva philosophy was to actually rethink the way that education is structured. So rather than saying, here's a bunch of information, I'm going to give you an exam, at one period of time you pass this exam, and now you've learned it, now you can forget it all and move on. Instead, we thought, okay, here is a piece of practical knowledge, and sometimes it's very similar to what you learn in a regular class, let's say a statistical model, or statistical methodology, and now we're going to verify that you know and build intuitions around how to apply that statistical methodology. And therefore, we don't teach that methodology in a statistics class. We'll teach it in a biology class. And then you're going to go and use it in a history class. And then you're going to go and use it in a psychology class. And then, by the way, you're going to go and not use it in class, but use it on a paper when you've got a week to think about it, as opposed to having to do it right away. And then you're going to do it when you create your own research, and then when you critique somebody else's research, when you produce your own project or work, versus when you assess somebody else's work. When I tell you, okay, time to apply Bayesian statistics in this instance to, hey, what do we do to analyze this piece without telling you what to actually apply? All of those are different pathways in your brain. And they're all different forms, vectors of transfer. And so if you embed dozens of these tools across an entire curriculum, you measure, give feedback, and provide incentive for students to apply across all of these dimensions, what happens at the end of that educational program is the student now has changed the way that they see the world. And they can deploy these pieces of practical knowledge in everything that they do, at work, at home, in an interpersonal relationship, when they vote, when they critique an article that they read, when they're being sold something and they have to figure out whether or not it makes sense to accept it or reject it, right? And that enables the education to be centered on not just being wise or learning how to be wise, but to do so in a way that is explicable. Because you've learned it not by accident, but you've learned it deliberately. And so you can actually not only internalize it yourself, but you can explain it to others. And that's the core philosophy that underpins what a Minerva education is all about.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. So I in fact, the reason, I guess, why I survived throughout this, very much, jumpy, on the jumpy train, will be like what I also learned from the education in this naval architecture department. That is mostly on the how we could design and make and operate the system, a large-scale system. So, and so it's not a kind of tool like statistics, but like it's kind of all of the kind of very much a broad concept. But at the end, it was very much useful. So that, like so you also could imagine that there are so many different types of those basic tools and methods for us to use in many aspects of the scientific purposes or business purposes and so on. So that is why I also recently talking about the importance of the learning through real experience. So that I hope also, so we have, at UTokyo, we have also so many different types of education programs by experiencing. So that I hope also all of the students also actively participating in such kind of programs. So that is my also suggestion.
Thank you. As much as we'd like to listen to this conversation continue, I think we will open the floor for questions for the next 10 minutes or so. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, but let's, because of the time constraint, please limit yourself to one question and make it relatively short. Let's start with a question from undergraduate students and then move on to graduate students. So undergraduate students who have questions, raise your hand. Don't be shy. Okay, good.
I have a question that in these days, the students are encouraged to be entrepreneurs and to make the startups and thinking about the career of making a startup. But I don't think the startup is the best way to make innovative things. And in your conversation, you say if we have a purpose and if we have, even if we have a purpose, it is not worth to go through this purpose in one path. So I think going to some companies and learning a lot of things, and then if you find any purpose or something by the experience, you can make a startup, I think. So how do you think about that? Student directly do the startup after graduate school?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, and this is less a question of opinion, it's more a question of fact. The fact of the matter is that the most successful time, if you look statistically, to create a startup is when you're in your late 30s or early 40s. That is just the reality of it. And so now, why is that? It is largely because you gain some experience, right? You gain a little bit of wisdom in the process. Now, I went about. Now, I had a very strange career, as you heard. Minerva is the 4th company that I ran, but it was only the first one I founded. So the other 3 companies I ran, I wasn't a founder of. The first company I ran, I was way too young. I was 23 years old, but was recruited to run it, which was absolutely crazy. And this was at a time when there weren't 23-year-old founders, so that's not like today. Learned a lot, made a lot of mistakes, did not end great, let's put it that way. And then I basically also decided at that point, because it was very painful, I would never run a company again. And then I joined another company at an individual contributor level, and then 4 years later, I was running it. For about 5 years later, I was running the company. And I was a very successful CEO at that point. I became CEO when I was 29, left the company when I was 35, but I was a very bad CEO. So that may sound like a little bit odd. How can you be both a successful and a bad CEO? Believe me, it can be done. So, and I won't get into too much detail as to how, but I learned a lot. The third company I ran, I was the executive chairman of, but we didn't have a CEO at the time. I learned a lot about running companies. I did a pretty good job at being the executive chairman, but it was already an existing infrastructure. There were existing employees, there was an existing business, so we could move the business from being a flat business to growing fast, but it was still harder, right, than if you were to start it from scratch. So then when I started Minerva, I could take all of the things that I learned and create a very different approach to an organization, not just to do that part. Now, the key though, and I will try to create some pattern recognition. Number one, where I learned the most was when I was working in a startup. The people who I worked with at large companies who then went to work at startups had a very, very hard time adding value because it's just a very different type of environment. Whereas the opposite was strangely not true. A lot of people I knew that worked at startups that then worked in large companies wound up being quite value add, quite impactful. So there's something about when you're in a small environment, you get to do a lot, you get to see things more holistically. And so if you want to learn how to certainly be a startup, I would just working in startup environments because it very much helps. So that's aspect number one. Aspect number two, however, is every organization has its dysfunctions, and including startups. And people rarely step back and think about what the dysfunctions I see, am I just learning how to deal with them versus maybe I shouldn't repeat them, right? And there are some things that are tried and true in a lot of startup mythology or as if they have to come with startup world, which certainly when I created Minerva, I rejected. So as an example, I have no co-founders. I think that co-founder relationships are very toxic, usually. And when you're a solo founder, it's not toxic. It's very easy. Unless you have split personality or something like that, it's much, much easier. You're also, especially if you're a founder CEO, there's really no question about, lack of clarity, conflict, and it enables you to empower your team in a much better way, rather than when you have to deal with other dynamics. There's also all sorts of things about organizational structure and things like that. And so why am I bringing this up? Because just being at a place isn't enough. You have to learn from working, and you've got to be able to look at it critically and say, what would I be doing differently? Not just what am I learning to do, but what am I learning not to do? What would I replace it with? And those are, I think, two important things if you want to eventually be at a point where you'll start something on your own.
For me, just one comment. So you don't have to stick onto the startup only. So also you can follow this train, right? But at the same time, you also could think about doing scientific research. So research, startups, or joining a big company. So there are so many, options that you can select to achieve your purpose or your goal. And even you can set up not a commercial company, but you could start off this NP, non-profit type of organization, whatever. So you could, and also you could try many things. And in time, so at one time you could perhaps you should stick on to one thing, but to concentrate on that activity. But so you could see so many different options.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question from graduate students this time.
My question is how to communicate with big company, especially big company society, about your concept of Minerva University. In my opinion, I'm really agree with you that, but on the other hand, for company or society wants students who has specific skills for engineering or finance, something like that. So I want to know how to involve society to your concept, or how to involve a big company involve your concept of Minerva.
No, it's a very good question, and there's the entire foundation of Minerva and what we do wasn't really there or couldn't have gotten there if everything universities did was perfect, right? Because if universities were doing an excellent job, Minerva wouldn't need to exist. And guess which organizations are the first ones to see the flaws in the university model. It's not other universities, it's companies. Companies hire students. So I'll give you a story. We have a very diverse student body at Minerva, and we had, and it's, many of them come from very poor socioeconomic backgrounds, but we had one year we admitted a student from Eton, which is, you know, a very, very prestigious, very expensive private school, and they call it something else in the UK, but in Britain. And so, and you know, this kid, he had two older siblings. One of them went to Dartmouth, one of them went to Duke, and he came for a preview weekend with his father to Minerva, and I thought that there's no way that he would come to this kind of rough and tumble new university, and it turned out that his father was the most excited. And eventually he came to Minerva, he graduated, he's doing fabulous. But his father says, look, I run an investment firm in London, and I'm curious, you know, if I were to ask you to guess, what is the percentage success rate of the analysts that I hire from Oxford or Cambridge? What would you guess it would be? And I said, well, how do you define success? And so success means that they come to the firm, they stay for their term of 2 to 3 years as analysts, and they get ranked in the top quartile of the analyst class. So I said, oh, you know, I would guess 50%. He said 0. 0. Every single student I hired from Oxford or Cambridge was a disaster, and I hired a lot of them. I said, okay, that's interesting. And he says, now I'll ask you a second question. What university do you think I had the best experience with? I said, I have no idea. He said, I'll tell you, it's the University of Bath. I said, what? He says, yeah, let me explain to you why. I figured it out, because I've been doing this pattern for years, and I can see what happens. I go to Oxford and Cambridge. I hire, you know, I'm not Goldman Sachs, I'm not, you know, Morgan Stanley. And so I hire, you know, good, you know, well, students that have a good academic background, but they're not in the top 10%. But when they come on board, because they went to Oxford and Cambridge, they think they know everything. They know nothing. They didn't learn anything that's relevant to what I need them to do. I have to train them anyway. But they wouldn't listen, because they said, oh, I have an Oxford degree, I know everything. And they couldn't do any good work. Meanwhile, at the University of Bath, I am the top employer. I get the valedictorian, I get the #1 student every single year. And that student was as smart as the best students at Oxford and Cambridge. He's completely humble and shows up and knows they didn't learn anything at the University of Bath, but they'll listen, right? And they wind up being the best analysts. Now, why is this an important story? It's an important story because this pattern is not isolated to this particular employer. Employers are broadly dissatisfied with the education that students receive at highly selective universities. And because of that, and this is very much so in American survey, so it's American employers, American universities, but because of that, there is a hunger for a different solution, which is better. And so it actually turned out to be a very easy process. They were the easiest things to explain. And so we saw that even for our very first graduating class, we've already graduated 5 classes, the placement of Minerva students, not only in jobs, but in entrepreneurship and in graduate schools as well, is the best of any American university, right from the top. So it actually didn't require much convincing, because once an employer interviews of somebody with a Minerva education, they see what they're able to do. So that's the solution.
Thank you. President Fujii, would you like to respond as the representative of the nation's most selective university?
It's not an American selective university.
American selective university. Yeah, well, that is why I'm also trying to let students think about the kind of multiple options for their career. And then the one thing that I want to also tell you is also tell you, and also I'm always talking to the people in the big meetings around, is so still in the current Japanese society, and especially for example, job hunting, there's a kind of shukatsu system that is starting much ahead of your graduation. Like even the third year of undergrad, and you already had started something new, something to interact with the company, right? So like this way, it's kind of really big machinery running in Japanese society. So then at a certain moment, as we listened to him, and also I was talking, so you could also see the change in your career or change in your position. And so I hope in the coming years, so we hope to be able to have some more flexible society in a way that you will, go through your career. So that is this change doesn't make, so it's not so easy to make this change, but so I hope we will see such kind of flexibility in the coming maybe decades or so. So and so that is also make the you also think about make it easier for you to think about your own career, and also to really looking at the purpose when you for example take the options right after your graduation. So like this way, I hope so listen to this kind of story. So I really would like to see such kind of change in the society, and then to do that, we also hope to be able to start something new at our own university. So.
Thank you very much for this wonderful dialogue. Unfortunately, our time is up, so we have to stop here. So let's thank Mr. Nelson and President Fujii. And I'm going to ask our Executive Vice President, Dr. Kaori Hayashi, to give a brief closing remark.
So thank you very much, Mr. Nelson and President Fujii, for this wonderful and inspiring session. And I also thank all the students who joined us today. And as an Executive Vice President in charge of Global and Diversity Affairs, I think, Mr. Nelson, you spoke my heart. The reason why I want to diversify the student community at this university is exactly what you have said, that we need always new ideas, we need the, so to say, the interactions with others who have been excluded from a certain community. It is not only for those who are excluded, but it is for all of us to go to the next step of our university. So I felt every single day, I feel that I'm doing a startup at the university with little resources and struggling to set up a new institute for the diversity and global. But I feel very encouraged, and I hope and I'm sure that you too are very much encouraged, that you are now inspired to do something very new during your college years. And I hope, Mr. Nelson, that you will come back soon and see how far and how much we have changed next time you meet us. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody.